the text, he repeats what we saw in chapter 8. Chapter 8, verse 12 is that wonderful promise. I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. In chapter 9, verse 5, Jesus said, as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Now, it's interesting because when Jesus taught from the Sermon on the Mount, he said to his disciples, you are the light of the world. Now, it was definitely true because after Jesus went back to heaven, he sent his Holy Spirit upon his apostles and upon the disciples. They then were to do what Jesus was doing. They were to be light in the world, just like you are light in the world. Okay, as a follower of Jesus Christ. Okay, you with me? Amen? Amen. I hope so. All right. Jesus said, as long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. Okay, let's go ahead to part 1. You would think that with such a miracle, it would have been dynamic. It's a dynamic and positive effect. You would think that such a miracle would have a dynamic and positive effect upon those who oppose Jesus Christ. Sometimes we think this way, and I think it's not wrong. I don't think it's wrong to think this way. If God would just do a miracle, then they would change their mind. We wish. But when Jesus finished his ministry, there were still many people that had not believed. Even those who had begun following Jesus turned away from him when they were persecuted. So that the greatest of miracles, when Jesus was on the earth, the greatest of his miracles did not convince everybody. We just know the miracles were given to show us who is Jesus Christ. We have to believe or reject whether or not those miracles testify to Jesus Christ. This whole chapter deals with that. It deals with either accepting or rejecting this miracle that shows us, or was showing them, that Jesus was the Messiah. So in this case, we would think that this kind of miracle, the blind man, he's born blind. This kind of thing never happens in history. He's born blind, but Jesus rubs some mud on his eyes, sends him to wash it off in the pool of Siloam, and he's healed. He can see. What a great miracle it was. You would think the hardest of sinners would have changed as a result. But even his parents weren't 100% behind him in the story. And they knew he was healed. Okay? So you would think that. This man declared Jesus was a prophet as a result of his healing. But rather than declaring Jesus a prophet, the Pharisees sought to prosecute and to persecute his followers rather than declaring it. When the blind man tells them what happened to him, they started an investigation. That's what happened. The testimony of his healing, people that were close and people that were present at that time, he told them, they saw it, they knew what had happened. But then they went to the Pharisees. Remember, the synagogue is the center of life. It's the center of the community where the Jewish community was there. It's all part of culture. And so it was natural for them to take this event to be tested and investigated by the Pharisees. Now the conclusion, if you look in verse 11, those that were present there said to this man, how were your eyes opened? So they're asking in verse 10, verse 11 now. He answered, and this is basically his testimony. A man called Jesus made clay, anointed my eyes, and said, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and I received my sight. All in, what is that? In English, it's 2 sentences. That was his testimony. Very short. 2 sentences. A man called Jesus made clay, anointed my eyes, and said to me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and I received my sight. That was it. Okay, and that's his testimony. And then they said, where is he? Yeah, I don't know. All he knew is he had been healed. Then they brought the man who used to be blind to the Pharisees. In verse 13. It was a Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. So we've got a religious problem here. It's a Sabbath day. Again, a miracle on the Sabbath. Then the Pharisees also asked him again how he had received his sight. He said, and he reduces it to 1 sentence testimony. Just 1 short sentence. He put clay on my eyes, I washed, and I see. 1 sentence testimony. He put clay on my eyes, I washed, and now I see. Wow. So from 2 sentences to 1 sentence. Simple. Very simple. We complicate our witness for Jesus Christ. Either we've been saved or we haven't. Either we know God or we don't. Either our life has been changed or it hasn't. Don't complicate it. He's down to a 1 sentence testimony. He put clay on my eyes, I washed, and I see. Therefore, some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God. That's a strange reply. Verse 16. He does not keep the Sabbath. Others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there was a division among them. So even the Pharisees, some of them were listening to the testimony. They knew this man had truly been healed. And so there was a division. They're arguing among the Pharisees about exactly how to respond to this miracle. So his testimony is given and there's argument going on. Verse 17. They said to the blind man, what do you say about him because he opened your eyes? Now, this is really the issue in the story. So please don't miss it. This is really the issue. What do you say about him? That's the same issue for you. What do you say about him? He's a prophet. Now this is all the information he had, but his conclusion was he must be from God. Same conclusion Nicodemus came to, remember? John chapter 3. He must be from God. No one can do these miracles unless God is with him. He must be from God. Over and over again, this is the response to the miracles. Remember, John is showing signs. Jesus is God. That's John's purpose here. He's teaching us. He's showing us. Anyone that reads it should be able to see. John is showing Jesus is God. The blind man said he's a prophet. The Jews did not believe concerning him. This is verse 18. He had been blind. He received his sight until they called the parents of the one that had received his sight. So here's the simple testimony. Let me not lose place here. Because it gets kind of interesting, I think. When we get down to verse 28, the Pharisees asked him not once but twice. Now they had heard from others about the miracle. He was brought into them and he gave them that simple, straightforward, 1 sentence testimony. Then they ask him again, what happened to you? And look at how the blind man replies. Verse 27. I told you already, you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? Wow. Now this made them really angry, because they reviled him and said, you are his disciples, we are Moses' disciples. And then they attack him. You were steeped in sin at birth. In other words, you were blind because of your sin. It was some sin that caused this. You were steeped in sin at birth. Verse 34. How dare you teach us? How dare you lecture us? You see, he didn't care at that point. He knew they were not going to listen. Listen, friends, there's some people that just aren't going to listen to the gospel. We can argue and argue. They're just not going to listen. Eventually we have to say, God, speak to them. Let the Lord do his work. I think that's a rare case, but our job is just to be a witness. The one that was a blind man was brought to the Pharisees for investigation. They wanted to examine his case in order to accuse Jesus Christ and challenge his authority. This resulted in persecuting the one who had experienced his healing power. The only thing the blind man was guilty of was being healed. That's the only thing. Think about it. He's blind from birth. The Lord gave him total sight. That's all he was guilty of. But he finally gets kicked out of the synagogue, thrown out, and mistreated, abused, and accused of being sinner, and lecturing them, and all of these things. Was he brought to the Pharisees in order to prove Jesus' work was authentic and truly from God? Well, I think the answer is obviously no. That wasn't why. The Pharisees had no intention. Some of the Pharisees were sincere when they examined him. Like I said, they were listening. They questioned the man's testimony. They even questioned his parents. Now I want to go look at verse 19. And I want you to see the investigation of the parents, because it's an important lesson, I think. They asked them, saying, is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see? His parents answered them and said, we know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But by what means he now sees, we do not know. Or who opened his eyes, we do not know. He is of age. Ask him. He will speak for himself. Interesting. His parents said these things because they feared the Jews. For the Jews had agreed already that if anyone confessed he was the Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. The parents said, he's of age, ask him. Now, interesting, because here's this guy that has his life's totally been turned upside down. It's a brand new way of life now. He sees things he never saw before, and there's no doubt about it. I think the parents obviously knew what happened. He told them the story. That kind of word would have went home first. And so they spread the story around, but the parents are really afraid. This is new for them too. They don't know what to do. They just know what happened. Now I want you to think about this, because when you come to faith in Jesus Christ, the first thing you want to do is go back home and tell your family. That's the first thing. We want them all to know, them all to be saved. When I was first saved, I wanted everybody to know. random strangers, everybody at home, everywhere. I wanted to tell them all about it. And that's just the way it was. Sometimes people would listen. Sometimes they didn't want to listen. Sometimes they were like, whoa, what's going on? So what happens in your life may be moving along really quickly. God has changed you. There's no doubt. I was blind. Now I see. There's no doubt the Lord is in your life and He's working in your life. But the others may not be ready yet. It may take time. You have to be patient.